I am Philip Douglas Perks. My grandfather was Philip Henry Perks, Sr. My father was Philip Henry Perks, Jr. And my mother said there wouldn't be a third Philip Henry Perks. And what my mother said happened. So I was Philip Douglas Perks.
And Doug, can you tell us a bit about where you were born and what your life was like just growing up?
Oh, sure. Born right here. And I was among the last babies born at Charlestown General Hospital when it was on Congress Street. Today it's headquarters for the American Public University System. But the new hospital was under construction and just nearing completion in January of 1948 when I was born here in Charlestown. Charlestown, of course, at that time was a much smaller community. The county, when I was a kid, had 20,000 residents. And most everybody knew everybody, as you can imagine. An example of that, when I was a junior in high school, I attended Charlestown High School, the Purple Panthers, and I was the quarterback on the football team. And the football team had a 9 o'clock curfew. My grandfather, Millard Henry Heineman, lived with us in his later years. And Granny Hyman got sick. My mother was a nurse at the hospital, and she called our family physician, Dr. Warden, and described Granddaddy's illness. And over the phone, Dr. Warden prescribed. It was about 9 o'clock at night. And he said, I want to get him started on this antibiotic, so you meet Mr. Stuck at the pharmacy, and he'll get you the antibiotic and get him started. Mr. Stuck owned Stuck and Alger Pharmacy, which is, there's an ice cream shop there today. But I was selected to drive to Charlestown to pick up the meds for my grandfather. Did so, came back, got him started. Well, the next morning, I was called to the office. Principal, Mr. William Brown, and my football coach, Mr. Kenny Sims, were both there, and the question they posed was, what were you doing in town last night after 9 o'clock? So, just shows you that I had lots of moms and dads in this small town of Charlestown as I grew up. The focus for us was the Jefferson Memorial Park. We spent all of our summer days there playing tennis, swimming at the park pool. And of an evening, the kids in town on Fridays and Saturdays went to the teenage canteen. The canteen at that time was over what was the Independent Fire Hall. It's the building which is across George Street from the courthouse, where the artists have their display room today. But on the second floor of that building was a teenage canteen. And on Friday nights and Saturday nights, we went there. It had a jukebox that cost you a dime to play a record. There were only 2 adults there. There were Mrs. Snyder and Mrs. Speck. The rest of the deal was run by the teenagers. On Saturday mornings, we went there, we cleaned up, we stocked the pretzel cans, we put pop in the pop dispenser, and then danced Friday night and Saturday night. So that's the kind of town I grew up in. Small town, lots of good friends. And as I look back on it, especially through the lens of my grandchildren, a lot more freedom. I lived on Prospect Street, and the park and the park pool was a little over a mile away from my house. Everything closed at 10 o'clock at night down there, but I was permitted to stay there till 10 o'clock, and I ran home. You know, sometimes kids don't have those opportunities today. I wandered the fields around Charlestown down to Evetts Run. Today, instead of growing corn and seeing cattle in the field, they're raising houses. But I have those good memories of being a kid here in Charlestown.
Sounds like an awfully nice place to grow up.
I thought so.
Doug, how long has your family been in this area?
My great-grandfather was from Page County, Virginia, and they were tenant farmers. And after the Civil War, those farms changed, and Granddaddy migrated here to Jefferson County and worked on a farm down at Cabletown. So since he pops up in the 1880 census, since the 1880 census, he was Joseph Pekin, P-E-K-I-N, Perks. He and his wife Molly, who was a first-generation Irish immigrant, but they came here sometime in the 1880s.
And as a kid, did you have any idea what you wanted to do when you grew up?
Yes. Since about 11 years old, I've been fascinated by the history of this place. I was a tenderfoot scout, and in 1959, the county, the entire county, commemorated the 100th anniversary of the John Brown raid. It was a week-long commemoration, and as a scout, we were assigned on a Saturday to go to Harper's Ferry, and on the big lawn below present-day Mather Training Center at Harper's Ferry, a big green open space, they had built a facade of John Brown's fort. And on that afternoon, they recreated the capture of John Brown at Harper's Ferry. And I can still see in my mind's eye those Marines crashing through that door, hear the bang. The Marines went in and they brought out John Brown, and he already had his head bandaged. But that's where I got the bug. And of course, 1959 is followed by the centennial observance of the American Civil War. And the other thing that's important, my mom and dad made sure when I expressed this interest that I had opportunities to experience it. You know, in 1962, I was on the field when they did the centennial recreation of the Battle of Antietam. We went to Gettysburg, so I had those opportunities and started collecting books. You know, I've still got a collection of the books that were produced by Life magazine and Look magazine, and the American Civil War Encyclopedia, all those things that came out in that 1960 era. So I've always been fascinated with our history. Had the opportunity to be part of that. In 1963, the community commemorated the centennial observance of West Virginia's becoming state in the Union. I can remember when John Brown's wagon was in front of the courthouse. It was on display there in 63, 64, and 65. And in the courthouse, civic organizations in town had display cases built. They were made of plywood, slant tops, glass through the front, and a platform for display of things. Probably some of these items may have been in there. But that'll eventually become the basis for the collection here at the museum. Yeah. So
that love of history,
yes,
must have somehow led you to this institution, the old Charlestown Public Library.
Absolutely.
How did that occur?
I've just been lucky. I've had a tremendous amount of luck. A good friend of mine, you know, most guys do things other than what I did on the morning of their wedding. I had a bunch of my fraternity guys, and the wedding wasn't until 6 o'clock. So we spent the day at Harper's Ferry, and then went to Shepherdstown, and then came back to get ready to go to the wedding. And while I was in Harper's Ferry, I met a high school friend, Debbie Bumgardner, who's today Debbie Pizzatelli. And Debbie was in her first year as a seasonal ranger at Harper's Ferry. And I said, geez, you know, how'd you? She said, you just apply. I said, okay. So on a whim, I applied and was lucky enough to get the job. So I started as a seasonal ranger at Harper's Ferry in 1970. Taught history at both Charlestown Junior High School and later Jefferson High School, and maintained my contacts with Harper's Ferry, and took my kids there. You know, we had a program called Community as Classroom, and with all the great history that we have in this county, I was able to take kids to see it up close and personal, to be on the ground where things happen, which is a whole lot better than sitting there reading it in the book. Continued that. I became the director of secondary schools in the county, and continued developing those programs. We started a program at Harper's Ferry called Schoolhouse Ridge. And still to this day, the 5th grade students in these county schools go to Harper's Ferry and learn about the siege at Harper's Ferry, which took place in the fall of 1862. So I've always been involved. When I retired from the school system, I went to work for Debbie Pizzatelli. I was the education coordinator for the Harper's Ferry then Historical Association, with them for 4 years. And I found out that there was a vacancy here. So took a chance, and I met with Sue Collins, who was then the curator of the museum, and she said, sure, we've got, you know, a part-time slot. At that time, Sue was the curator, and there were 2 women working here, Miss Katie Crane and Betsy Covey. So I was to be part of the team that was here 5 days a week, taking care of these exhibits. Unfortunately, Ms. Crane got sick right away. I worked with her very shortly. Ms. Covey and I worked together, and she went on a trip and took ill, and it incapacitated her to the extent that she wasn't here. So my second year in 2005, it was just me and Sue Collins. We were here at the museum, happy as a bear with honey.
How did your role expand since you started here? I assume you played a number of different roles. Yes. At this institution.
Yep. Sue was the curator, and in 2006 she named me the assistant curator. And that was the year we got the George Washington letter. It was about after Thanksgiving, and the phone rang, and I answered. And it was Miss Cornelia Brewer, and I'm paraphrasing, but in essence what she said was, I have some Washington family memorabilia. Do you think your museum would like to have it? I said, yes, ma'am, I think we would. And she gave us the letter, and she gave us the portrait that hangs, the copy of the Gilbert Stuart portrait of General Washington, a portrait of George Mason, one of very few copies of General Washington's will, a death mask. And interestingly enough, Sue was away over Christmas. She visited, her daughter lived in Sweden, and she went and spent 2 weeks with her daughter at Sweden. So it was up to me to get these artifacts here. Needless to say, I was on pins and needles, and it came through the parcel post. I went to the Ranson post office and picked up the letter, which was signed by George Washington and written about the death of his brother Charles. In 2009, the library director stepped down, and Jim Glimp, who was then the president of the board, asked if I'd be interested in being the director. So I did that, and I for a while I did director and part-time assistant curator. Sue was here by herself, so I would come down 12 to 2 or and work with her so she could get office work done. But then it just wasn't working. So in 2010, 2010, we hired Gordon Gay to serve as the curator, and he was here on a full-time basis. Gordon had a long-time career with the National Park Service and was very familiar with curatorial work. And that's when we began to convert the collection to a database. That was the first step. Initially, Jim had at least considered making a database where we could enter all of our artifacts and photographs and so forth and so on. But that just didn't work out. So we started with a little program called Past Perfect. And it was Gordon's principal job to begin transferring all the paper records over to this database.